What is going on, Hive Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today we're going to tackle intermittent fasting for women. Is it safe for women to do? Is it beneficial for women, or is it harmful for women? This is a question that I get a lot, and I am finally tackling it in this video. Stay tuned. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this video as concise as possible and try to make it as clear as possible, as there are a few studies out there, but very limited studies when it comes to actual humans. And before I even go into this, I want to let you know that with the studies that exist in terms of specifically differentiating men and women and how they've received the protocol of intermittent fasting hormonally, internally, the differences between the two, they're extremely limited. Most of the studies that are out there do use both men and women, and they just tackle the cardiovascular aspects, the body fat loss, certain hormonal elements like the insulin resistance and sensitivity, and they tend to be on the positive side as a whole for the groups. But there was a study that was released that has worried so many women, but this study isn't even done with actual humans. This study is done with rats, but we know that rats do help us understand what the transition would be with humans if we haven't done the human studies, since a lot of the things that have happened to rats transition well to humans. However, we have to dig deeper into the study itself to understand what was happening exactly. Now, these rats were doing alternate day fasting. Now, although the female and the male rats were doing alternate day fasting exactly the same way, the female rats were the ones that were affected the most. Now, to truly say that this was fasting would mean that the rats were not eating for long periods of time, but that is not truly the case. They were at a caloric restriction. They were able to eat, but they couldn't eat a certain amount. They couldn't go above a certain amount. So they truly were not fasting. And everything that was fasting and caloric restriction garnered the same results. So it's not so much the fact that they're fasting, but it's just the caloric restriction element that's being added to it. When a female is severely restricting calories, they will go through those hormonal processes that unfortunately can affect the reproductive system. In this study, it showed that the female ovaries actually shrunk, that the women were hyper alert, and that they didn't sleep during the appropriate times to sleep. And for rats, that's the daytime, since they are nocturnal creatures. Now, this study was done in 2012, but it is majorly flawed, as the alternate day fasting wasn't pushed as true fasting. It was pushed as caloric restriction, severe caloric restriction. So the unfortunate answer to these studies is that it is very unclear, considering the fact that they truly were not testing fasting. Now, what can we learn from this type of study is that when you're doing intermittent fasting, you still want to make sure that you get adequate calories in. You don't want to go below a crazy number. You don't want to go below 1200 calories. You want to maintain an elevated calorie count intake of at least 1200 or 1500 to make sure that you're getting adequate calories for the day, even though you're at a deficit. And if you're just going to maintain weight, ensure that you increase your calories to about the maintenance level, or a little bit below, or a little bit above. There were studies that were done with men and women that were obese, and when they did studies with the obese men and women, they showed that all of the properties were very similar, and that's everything. The insulin sensitivity, the ghrelin, all of that was similar in those studies. But when performing these studies in non-obese women versus non-obese men, it showed that non-obese men were affected less negatively than non-obese women. But this is unfortunately because we have different reproductive systems in our bodies. Women are designed to carry another human being in their body to reproduce. The body will kind of try to shut that down if it feels that the woman isn't able to find food and eat food on a normal basis. But this is when you're getting to the non-obese level. When you're getting to the non-obese level, that's when you start transitioning into that area where the body wants to protect you from having a child because of the fact that you're showing signs that you can't readily find food. So this means that they are very special circumstances where you shouldn't fast. If you're actually trying to have a baby, do not fast. And I mean even before you're pregnant, if you're actually trying to have a child, if you're actually trying to conceive a child, give yourself all of the advantage. Do not be at a caloric restriction and do not perform intermittent fasting. Also, if you're actually pregnant, understand that you need to nurture not one person, but two people. And at this point, of course, it isn't best to be at a caloric restriction, nor is it best to do intermittent fasting. And your body will be very intelligent and smart. If certain things start to happen that are irregular, then you could also stop doing intermittent fasting until those irregularities go back to normal. Then you could adjust from there. Now, why do I say this? It's because you need to understand your own body in relations to intermittent fasting. All of those benefits when it comes to the metabolic functions and the weight loss and the body fat burning are there for both groups. And there are multiple studies that show both groups mixed in together and is showing a positive outcome for the total group. So there are many studies that actually show the benefits of intermittent fasting, and there are very limited studies that touch on that difference between the two groups on all of the hormonal and reproductive organ aspects. It's more of a study on severe caloric restriction in which they utilized alternate day fasting, but it wasn't true fasting. It wasn't because of the protocol of fasting that those female rats were seeing these issues. It was because of the severe caloric restriction, and because the male rats do not have all of these different elements in which they can become pregnant or have to nurture a child or have to give birth to a child. Because they don't have those specific elements, their body does not react as aggressively as a female body would when there's a scarcity of food. But if you are overweight, it does show that the benefits are nearly identical for both men and women. It's only when you start hitting the non-overweight level where it starts to get a little gray with the difference between the two. As the studies show that fasting does affect the glucose tolerance negatively in women, but not men that are non-obese. But that is not the case when both groups are in the obese range. So if you are in a position where you need to lose weight, then intermittent fasting is really good for you, no matter if you're man or woman. But if you simply want to maintain your weight, this is when you have to look at it more strategically as a woman. And this is so that you can control the downregulation of your reproductive system. When you reach a certain point in your body composition, you want to pay attention to your body more intensively, ensure that you're getting in the adequate calories, and adjust accordingly. If everything is running smoothly, then you can go ahead and continue the fasting. But if something is off, an irregular menstrual cycle, for example, then at that point you can wane off of intermittent fasting for a bit until the irregularity corrects itself, then give it some time and then go back into it and see what happens. And I say this just for you to be in the safest position possible, because truly we still don't have enough valid evidence, because the studies that can put us in a better light when it comes to these things just don't exist yet. So the study that has put a lot of fear in women to do this is the study that I mentioned in regards to the rats. So essentially we're just getting a severe caloric restriction study as opposed to an intermittent fasting study. And also keep in mind, it only tested one specific way of fasting. It didn't test a shorter term fasting. So doing less than 24 hours may not net the same results. All in all, there isn't anything to really conclude that it is inherently bad for you to do intermittent fasting as a woman. Understand, however, women's bodies are different than men and vice versa, and women do have to take in another person in their body, so that's going to add a different element, a different dynamic to the whole equation. But from the human studies that we do have, if you are obese, intermittent fasting will be identical in its benefits to both men and women. I hope this clears some of the confusion up. I know it's not enough information, but that's the problem, is that we just don't have enough information to conclusively say that intermittent fasting is inherently bad for you. We have to wait for more studies to come out. So I hope this video has helped you guys, and I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon, and I'm going to put their names right up here.